Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, 10 Common Missteps Uncovered in an Analytics Audit. My name is Michelle Versteeg. I'm Director of Marketing with Cardinal Path and will serve as your moderator today. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them through the questions panel on your screen and we'll address them later in the presentation. We do have time set aside for these today, so send as many as you have. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag #AuditsForAnalyticsStrategy. We are recording this session, and everyone who registered will get an email with a link to the on-demand webinar within the next few days. A bit about Cardinal Path. We are a digital data analytics firm that helps organizations unlock the value in their data and move the business forward based on those insights. Our teams comprise some of the top minds in the digital space, and our aim is to share all that we know. We have two esteemed presenters today. Alex Langshire is co-founder and senior partner with Cardinal Path. He previously founded and led Public Insight, an analytics firm, prior to its merger to form Cardinal Path. Alex is the past president and director emeritus of the Digital Analytics Association, teaches digital marketing optimization for the University of British Columbia, and is on the board of advisors for McMaster University Analytics Program. He's a frequent speaker and author and all-around thought leader in his field. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Michelle.
And we also have Stefan Hamel with us today. Stefan is Director of Innovation with Cardinal Path and a distinguished thought leader himself in the field of digital analytics. He's been named Most Influential Industry Contributor by the Digital Analytics Association and has made significant contributions to the industry, including creating the Online Analytics Maturity Model and Web Analytics Solution Profiler, better known as WASP. Stefan, it's great to have you here.
Hi, Michelle. Great to be here.
So there's lots to cover today, but first I think it's worth mentioning that we did ask a question of all attendees to better understand where they are in their journey, and 58% said that they are still working on being able to trust their data. So with that, Stefan and Alex, I will turn the session over to you.
Hey, thanks very much, Michelle, and welcome to all of you who are attending the webinar today. It's Alex speaking here, and I'm really psyched to be doing this with my colleague Stefan. Something that we've talked about together many, many times over the years is this aspect of, can you trust the data that's coming into the analytics reports that you're looking at? And the truth of the matter is I think regardless of who we work with and at what stage they are, there's always kind of this coming back to the question about, how good is your data? And the reason why is because it's a real shame to make really good decisions on bad data. And yet so often, particularly when it comes to instrumenting the digital ecosystem and your footprint, your digital footprint, these things are getting really complex. And as a result, it's becoming more and more difficult to really do a good job to instrument them to give you accurate insight into the totality of interactions across them. So, Stefan and I have talked about this a lot. I don't know, Stefan, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. I guess in the coming half hour to 45 minutes, I guess people are going to get a glimpse of the kind of conversation we have together. We both work remotely, and we chat very often about the type of issues that we see in implementations. And we could almost say, after 10 or 15 years doing digital analytics, there are things that are still rampant and don't get solved, while the tools, the means, the technology is there to improve the data quality. So it takes a serious approach to it, but there's a solution. There's hope.
Absolutely, and I think that's what's got me really excited about today's webinar is that, our approach is really going to be one where we're going to walk you through what we think are some of our top 10 that are you'll be able to walk away from today and start to do some immediate things which we believe will add to data quality. And Steph, a lot of this comes from from the work that you did in pioneering this whole concept of digital analytics maturity. Mm-hmm. And at Cardinal Path, we're really deeply wedded to this concept. A lot of people will come to us and say, hey, I've been hearing about big data. I want to I want to do some predictive analytics. I'm thinking about doing some, really robust audience segmentation and doing some high-end targeting. And, all those things are great, but, we break the world down into basically 3 layers: a technical, a business, and strategic layer. And people are asking us about stuff that's way out up on the right side of the curve here, which is, the strategic stuff, right, which is fantastic. But as you and I both know, that you can only get to once you've done the stuff which is on the left side of this, which is, getting the technical layer in place.
And I think it's quite revealing that, about 60% of those attending this webinar said that they are still at a stage where they want to trust the data. So until you master the technical aspect, it's going to be very, very hard to move on to the business and strategic aspects. And the thing also that kind of we hear very often is you go to conferences, or you hear about the success stories, you hear about the big players that really master the technical, the business, and the strategic layer, because it makes a good story. But the reality is the vast majority of people are still struggling with things like implementation. So what we're going to address today is really focused on the technical aspect of getting the data right, and things that we uncovered through I don't know how many audits we've done, right?
Yeah. I mean, literally, the data what we're going to show you is like kind of the top 10 from, I would say, well over 250 audits over the course of the past, I don't know how many years, but so absolutely. Yeah. So let's dive into it. We're at on the technical side. Let's go.
Drum roll. What's the number one?
Number one.
Yeah.
Number one is.
Number one is.
Oh my God! Can you believe it? Outdated tracking code. Yeah. So let me just start off on this. One of the beautiful and wonderful things about in this case particularly a GA is that they're constantly updating their code, and it's not just GA. All the vendors are constantly doing this. They're improving what these things can do, and they're doing so because the field is evolving and improving as well. And because organizationally we see that often the people that are deploying code are not the same people that are using the insights or the data, you kind of get this unphasing of things, or there's release cycles which make things difficult. But bottom line, we go in and we take a look. We say, oh, that's code from 2 or 3 versions ago. And so, if you want to do particularly some of the more complex things going forward, you need to start getting that code updated now. And the other reason why is because, a lot of these things are one-way streets. If you haven't collected the data correctly, or you don't have the data being collected at all because the code won't enable it, well, that's gone. You can't recover that. That's history. Those sessions are lost.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. We're showing Google Analytics here, but if you are using Adobe Site Catalyst, they also underwent several revisions throughout the years and the months, and they now have the Adobe Dynamic Tag Manager.
Yep.
So moving from an approach where you had to work with your IT or web development team to get the code on the page, which in itself was let's say it, a real pain. And moving to tag management systems where you can not only manage your digital analytics tags like GA or Site Catalyst, but also manage the other tags like ad networks and stuff like that also goes on the web. But you know what? I guess we can go to the number 2, which is, okay, let's suppose that you finally moved on from...
For a sec here, Steph? Before we go to number 2, let's just make a everybody who's listening in, they should raise their right hand, and they should kind of repeat the oath of, I will check my code and make sure that it is up to date. I know it sounds really basic, but, right then and there, huge value from just doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we see also, be careful or mindful about the fact that when you move from what we call the classic GA to universal analytics, oftentimes we see kind of old leftover code intermingled with the new code. That's not really a good thing.
Yeah, and that, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, which is, auditing and scanning your sites and every page on your site to see, like, maybe some section of the site was done by an agency, who's no longer working with you and it hasn't been touched in a while or something like that. But let's not also forget that, we just talked about Google Analytics, just to remember that, they're deprecating and removing classic GA, and that window, that train is leaving the station, and for all of you who haven't done this, the window is shrinking, and I think it ends by April 2016, and while that might seem far away, that's going to be almost like tomorrow for some organizations. So
yeah, absolutely.
So
let's suppose
GTM.
Yeah, you did all the good work of removing classic GA and deploying Google Tag Manager. So that's all great, right? Now you have control, you have the freedom. But then this happened, and despite the, I guess the confusion comes from historically vendors were telling you, put the code at the bottom of the page because, it might slow down the page and the user come first and so on. And then they said, well, no, put it in the head at the start of the page because it's asynchronous and it won't interfere with the performance of the page and it will provide better data. And that's right. That's true. And then you come with something like Google Tag Manager or Adobe Tag Manager or Insight and Intidium and any of the other TMS, and they have different instructions on where to put the code. Sometimes it's 2 snippets of code that you need to put, one at the top, one at the bottom. In the case of Google Tag Manager, it's right after the opening body tag, and that's the only place where you should put it. Don't put it anywhere else.
Yeah,
we see it all the time. People put
it all the time. And I'll just give a real life example of where this can be really problematic, right? So, we talked about this, I think it was a few months ago, where an organization had not placed their container tag in the right place. And why it was a problem was because they had all these landing pages set up for all their campaigns, and they're running it all through GTM, and they had redirects for a lot of those landing pages, and because of that, the page was redirecting before the code was firing, and so all the visits that were coming to the site weren't being recorded with all the proper parameters, so they weren't able to really understand the true impact from their ad spend. So just like a small little thing that can have a really big impact on understanding ROI.
Yeah, and what we see, one of the reasons why we see the container tag being in the wrong place is oftentimes the platform used for the website doesn't allow you to put the code in the right place.
Good point.
But you know what I would say to that? I would say, well, at the end of the day, it's HTML code that comes into a browser and it's JavaScript that comes into a browser. There is a way to do it. It's just that oftentimes, it's a lot easier to say, nope, can't be done, than really trying to find a solution.
Stefan, you just spoke like a true developer.
Yeah, exactly. Don't take no as an answer.
Don't take no as an answer, that's right. What's the next one?
The next one.
Can I take this one? How about I take this one and start off with it? All right. So, I can't even tell you how many times we've gone. This is a little bit more GA focused, this image, but it's the same. It's basically what is the structure of your account or your property or your views. How do you set up your analytics and your reporting so that you're able to see things easily at a glance? And as you know, Steph, I like to keep a tidy desk, and a little bit on that neat and tidy desk is an example of a clean mind, tidy mind. So it's the same thing when I'm looking at how people manage their views, let's say in GA. And we always recommend that you should always have an unfiltered raw view, just like always, always, always. You do not touch this. It is just data coming in. It's your kind of checksum against anything. That's it. Have one that's your sandbox. You call it whatever you want, sandbox, testing, development, trial, whatever you want to call it, but one that's specifically designed, that's where you're going to play around in. And then your production. You push to production. When it's in production, all the release cycles need to apply to it. It needs to be the exact something that you need to have a lot of controls over who's going to touch that particular view. But three. I also, it's not in this image, but that I like to put like numbers in front of them, right? So like a 1 dash or O1 dash or O2 dash. So just kind of my approach towards having clean account and property structures.
Yeah, and you don't have to keep the default name for the web property. Here it says on the right, it shows cardinalpath.com with the UA number, but you don't have to use that naming convention. You can name your web properties the way you want, and if you only manage a small account, there's no problem. But when you end up managing very many websites, you need to have a naming convention that will make more sense, and especially for the filters. And you know what I'm doing also is that numbering convention, the benefit is you will notice that it will sort it by alphabetical order. So if you use a numbering convention, like I like to use like 3 digits, so 100, testing would be maybe 900, and my unfiltered raw data is always like 999. So it shows at the bottom.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I do the same with Google Tag Manager. And typically I have one container will match one web property.
Yeah.
And I use the same naming convention. So when I look at GTM or GA, I have the same logic, the same structure. A lot easier to manage.
Yeah, and what's on the left here, this image. That's of course we're trying to create something, but we'll see like you can have 50 properties and 25 views. It can get rapidly really really crazy. I love the idea of the 999 for the raw and filter because it pushes it right down at the bottom, which likely you won't scroll down to, which means that it's doing its job. It's not being touched. It's just collecting data, and it's your checksum.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings really the next one, which is about the filters and the views, and not having the right filters in place. And when we do an implementation, we have I would say probably a good 12 to 15 or 20 filters that are consistently included. I think you had a very good example the other day about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so as everybody should know, like filters are destructive, right? When you put a filter on something, all the data that's going to flow into that view is going to be cleaned of whatever you pulled out of it.
Yeah,
right?
from that point on.
So,
that's it.
And let's just like back it up for just a second before I get to the story, and that is, I think a lot of people, and tell me if you think you're right, if you agree, but a lot of people confuse the use of filters and segments, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So they'll say, I want to create a segment that's looking at only this, and so they put a filter on and they apply it to production maybe or what have you, and suddenly the data after that's going to look very different from the data before that filter. So again, don't play with filters unless you kind of know what you're doing. And if you're thinking about making segments, those really should use the segment tool, which is again we're looking at GA here, so. I want to put that in there. But one of the fun things was working with an organization that ships a product only to Canada and the United States, and taking a look at their data, and they were really concerned about conversion rate, right? And taking a look at their data, I saw that they didn't have a filter on, and they were looking at everything from the perspective of every visitor from every country. And I just said, well, hold on a sec. Do you ship to Niger or do you ship to Thailand? And they're like, of course not. I said, look, why don't we just create a view with a filter that has only those countries that you ship to, and call it that, name it appropriately and put that in there. And guess what? The best thing of that is that your conversion rate is going to go instant increase.
Yeah.
And it's like,
better
conversion rate. Really simple things like we fight tooth and nail for like a 0.5% change in conversion rate. And here's like something super simple you can do.
Well, of course, it's just playing with the numbers and what's the story you can make out of it. But I think it makes much more. It's almost like. Not almost, but it is going back to the 3 basic questions, which is, who's your audience? If you're not doing business in foreign countries, maybe it's better to filter that traffic, but you still want to have it somewhere, like in the raw unfiltered view, because in the long run, it might tell you something about your audience that, oh, maybe you should expand, globally because there's really an interest in the market. It's just a different audience, a different segment. Mm-hmm. And then the other question is, of course, who's the audience? What are they trying to do on a website, and is it working? Those are really the three basic questions that you want to answer.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to come back to that when we talk about another one of our top 10.
Oh yeah, you know what? And just before we move to the next one,
sure.
One of the new parameter that you can set up is bot filtering. So
exactly.
in your configuration, so on the unfiltered raw data view, you don't turn it on because you want to keep the bots in there. Yep. But on your production view, you want to. There's a checkbox that says, filter out all known bots traffic. And it's interesting because I've seen in some cases a difference in traffic, up to 20 or even 30%, depending on the website. You can see a huge impact because you're just filtering out the traffic from all those bots that are coming to crawl the site and get the content and get indexed in search engines and stuff like that. So you want to turn that switch on for your production.
I can't agree more with you, Stefan. Like the number one takeaway: if you haven't got bot filtering on, turn bot filtering on. I mean, that is just a flat blanket statement that we could say. And like you said, not on your unfiltered raw view, right? On any other one, but turn your bot filtering on, and again, instant increase in conversion rate, hopefully.
Yeah.
What's our next one?
Next one. Not stripping the query string parameters, and I've put a couple of examples here from the. I guess they're all bad.
Oops, I did it again. That's Stefan humor for all of you.
Yeah, exactly. But the way to let's look at each one. Session ID on some web platforms. There's a session ID, namely on a .NET environment. There's often a session ID that is attached to your session. And when you go into your all pages report, search for a question mark, and you will see all the traffic that was registered with the query string parameter, and you're going to see all the various parameters, and some of them might be perfectly legit, right? And you want to keep them. But if you see something like session ID with a bunch of, a long string of characters, or cart ID, that's probably something that you want to filter out. So in your configuration, it's pretty easy. You go in and there's one of the fields that says filter query string parameters, and you enter each one that you don't want, separated by a comma, and that's it. From that point on, don't put it onto your unfiltered raw data view. You might want to keep it as is.
I mean, this is one where it's a little bit more of a. You need to be a little bit careful too, because sometimes these session user data, right? That's not really depending on the CMS, that might not be real information. That might just be the CMS doing its thing to maintain session. So, it's a value that's being entered, but it has no real user value. So again, the thing which I would caution in this particular example is that you really need to understand how your CMS works. And oftentimes the analyst has no control over who chose the CMS or even how the site was designed, which can have severe implications in terms of the data that you're getting. So you really need to look at this one and do some of your own testing to determine whether or not, this is just the CMS, doing what it needs to do to maintain session as somebody's moving about page to page. Or no, in fact, this is actually, real pages being loaded by real behavior on the site. So.
Yeah, like if you see something like product ID, very likely it's going to be it's a legitimate page, and you want to keep the product ID.
Exactly.
And the last example here with the I did it again. This one is a little bit special because in the terms of service of Google, you're not supposed to track any personally identifiable information like email. Mm-hmm. And one of the most common case is when you do an email campaign, there's that unsubscribe button link at the bottom of the email, and mm-hmm. people click on that, and of course they end up landing on a page on your site, and oftentimes that email address is right there on the query string. This is the only exception where I would say you need to filter out in your unfiltered raw data view, because you don't want to send that data to Google. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that can expose the organization to all kinds of legal risk. So, yep. So you do have a very good point there. Yeah, that's a good. And then put something else on too, also about query parameters, right? So mm-hmm. you've got what, 50,000 rows? Again, we're speaking mostly of Google, but you've got 50,000 yep. rows in a typical report. So you can imagine if you're not kind of either concatenating or stripping out these query parameters, you can rapidly, just zip over your 50,000 rows. And anything over that just gets lumped together as an other page.
Yes.
And that's another reason why. Because for very large sites, if you've got this thing going on, and again, we're kind of talking maybe an edge case, so we shouldn't spend too much time on it, but that can be a real pain when you see that other, and you're wondering, well, what is that? Well,
and that other is very often is the biggest chunk of the report you're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all weird behavior too. So,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So right, where's the next one?
Next one?
Yeah.
Next one is a classic: self-referral and cross-domain. So two examples maybe, one about self-referrals. Self-referrals often happen when there are some pages that are untagged on your site. So basically there's a break in the flow of page views, and if you have tracking on page A, no tracking on page B, and then tracking on page C, what's going to happen is page C is going to think that page B is the referral, but it's really coming from your own website. And because there's no tracking, GA is not able to snitch the session together and will identify page B as being kind of a new referral, which is really not good. It's going to completely mess up your source report and the sessions and all those things. The other case is... Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, the other case, and that's one way that it happens, absolutely. The other case, of course, is timeouts, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, you land on a page, you view a page, you go out for lunch, and when you come back, you click on the next link. It's going to be a self-referral because the session has timed out. That one is fine. What you want to look at is when you go into your all referrals report, look at the source of traffic, and you can drill down on that and see what is the page being tracked, and review those pages. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time on that. You will quickly see if those are some untagged page or if it's just because the session was timed out.
And one of the things which I just wanted to say here is that, if you ever saw my browser, you'd probably freak out at the number. Like, I have a tidy desk, but I have a messy browser, so a ton of tabs which are open. I think that my browsing behavior is similar to most, lots and lots of tabs open. So this issue of timeout sessions, is, I think it's real and growing.
Yeah. Yeah, that and then the other case,
shopping carts.
Shopping carts, yeah. So oftentimes and this also goes back to one of the first issues that we encounter is having a wrong version of a code. It often happens when you use a third-party shopping cart where you don't have much control over the way they have implemented the GA. For example, so you might have Universal Analytics on your website, but your third-party shopping cart is still using GA, and they are slow to change it and so on. Or simply you haven't set up the cross-domain correctly, and this is so much easier with GTM and Universal Analytics now. It's a lot simpler. It's still a bit of a more advanced configuration, but it's a lot simpler than it used to be.
Well, just as an FYI, I mean, it used to be a few years ago, particularly on larger sites, cross-domain tracking was something that we would invest a lot of time. I mean, clients would come to us and say, "Look, we want to do this," and so we'd have to do the work behind it. Truthfully, the latest version of GTM and UA have they've hats off. I think they've made this orders of magnitude simpler. And so now it's really a decision that you make within the GTM interface as to whether or not you want to do cross-domain tracking, and the code takes care of the rest. So, there's always issues, but by and large, this is one that, I really hope to see disappear.
Yeah. And so if you have subdomains, it's already handled correctly, so you don't have to do cross-domain anymore.
Right.
But if you have really true cross-domains, then, of course, you need to basically list all of the cross-domains that you have. So I call them siblings. Look at the
good word.
Yeah, the your brothers and sisters on your that are part of the same user experience, and you want to track it as a natural flow from the source of traffic down to the conversion. If you don't set up cross-domain correctly, all of that is going to fall apart and it won't be accurate.
Yeah, again, but let's be clear. What is the measurement goal of the site? What are you trying to track? Because I mean, you can track across all these domains. The question is that the right decision to be making? So,
are you kind of implying that you need to kind of think ahead?
Yeah, maybe I am implying that. It's not often that I do it, but yeah, I am. Which maybe that takes us to our next slide. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting because the first 6 things that we mentioned are pretty much related to tracking itself, to the technology of tracking and getting the data. And we'll see that the next ones are going to be more about the business or the governance around it, or less the technical aspect.
Yeah, and so let me just give you a good example of this, right? Organizations are people. They're large. People change jobs. They change focus. Things happen. One group is doing a campaign here. Something else is happening there. One of the things which I do, for a diagnostic, how you go to the doctor and he'll do tests, and it's basically trying to determine how your health is, make you breathe to listen to your lungs and stuff like that. For me, I like to look at annotations. Does the client have annotations? How many of them do they have, and what are the nature of those annotations? Because, if you do, you typically will see that, there's some technical annotations, push new code live to production on such and such date, but you don't see a lot of annotations from other kind of departments or divisions within the company. And this is really important because, a cardinal path, you say all the time, to understand the data, you must engage in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by that, what we mean is that just looking at the data doesn't share with you what's going on elsewhere. So is there something that's happened outside of the context of the company that might have had an impact? If it is, capture it, because you won't remember. I mean, I don't remember what I had for dinner yesterday, kind of thing. So, trying to remember 3 months ago what it was that might have caused that spike if you're not around. And typically, the request to understand something happened when you're not around, or something is getting in the way, or whatever. So, annotations are a small thing. They help you to provide context to the data. And by doing so, whether that context is good context, hey, we did this great campaign and things went great, or bad context. We pushed code and we pushed a new version of the site live, and code wasn't deployed on half the site pages. And that's why the traffic went down, whatever that might be. So annotations are really important. And what they reflect is that there is ownership, right? There's ownership across the organization. It reflects that the organization is thinking kind of longer term as a group, and they're planning. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think you sum it up very well.
Really?
Next one?
I'm speechless. Did I just say everything? You have nothing else to add?
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it.
Amazing. Mark this day down.
Okay, next one. Campaign taxonomy and just the case sensitivity of the tracking that you do. And we talk about campaign taxonomy, but it also applies to the whole anywhere you should have a naming convention. So it might be your content architecture. What's the content architecture naming convention for the pages so that you can make sense of it and that are human readable? Not sometimes we see CMS where you don't really get a link. What you see is a page ID, and that doesn't mean anything to human beings, and it's pretty bad from an SEO perspective. But campaign taxonomy is simply the way you're going to name your campaigns so that when you look at the reports, it can make sense. And if you work for a medium to large organization, oftentimes you work with external agencies that are going to run some of your campaigns. If you don't define a taxonomy, it's going to be a mixed match of all kinds of source of traffic and campaign names and very different terminology. And honestly, when we do that with clients, sometimes it takes quite a while to get everything rolling and in place correctly, because you really have to take a step back, think about it, and even test it for a while before getting it right and having the level of details in your campaign naming convention that will provide the insight that you're looking for.
So let me make a prediction, Steph.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to make a prediction. You know how you basically can't turn on the TV or go online without seeing an article or something or an ad talking about big data or analytics.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that the next one is going to be taxonomies. Maybe not on TV, but certainly in the industry, because something that you're fond of saying is that your websites really are now kind of online applications. They're super complex, and taxonomies are really important because while we talked earlier about the code side of things, the code is simply going to record what the front end is doing, right? Mm-hmm. So how you structured the front end is super important because that dictates what's going to be slotted into your data reports.
Yeah.
So taxonomies are super important, whether they're campaign or they're pages or what have you.
Yeah, and then the case sensitivity of those campaign naming conventions. So you should set up a filter that will lowercase everything or uppercase everything. I don't care, but because the campaign name on the query string can be uppercase and lowercase, and the browser will just take it. There is no problem there. The GA on the other end, or most of the other tools that are tracking campaigns, are going to make a difference depending on the case, and you might end up with two different campaigns when in reality it's just the same.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that taxonomies and case sensitivities, I mean, this is tool independent really issues that we're talking about. And the reason why you want a taxonomy is because let's say somebody in one department pushes out email and they're using, I don't know, Silverpop, and they've put something capital E, lowercase M-A-I-L, and somebody else is using, because it happens, they're in a different area, they're using a different tool, and they've put it out all lowercase email. Well, you know how that's going to look like in GA. That's going to be two different lines, two different things. And now the question is, all right, well, I'd love to see everything across my email and then be able to drill in, drill down. So it's just about keeping things nice and clean.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have two more to go.
Let's do it.
Too many or too few events. You just alert to that. One of the things that I keep saying is websites are not a collection of pages anymore. Websites are really online applications, and when you look at a page, there are so many other things that can be tracked, like you have tabs within the page, you have overlays, you have those infinite scrolling pages and responsive design and all those things. And as the tool become more advanced, and now we have tag management solution systems to handle those tags, the tracking requirements and the expectations are becoming also way more complex than they used to be. I see people trying to track everything just in case they need it, and that often leads to too much noise and distraction and losing focus on what are the real business outcomes that you should be tracking instead of tracking, scrolling of the page just because you happen to be able to do it, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's what I call see why I cover your ass kind of thing. I don't know if I'll need it, so I'll just track it.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to remember that has some real implications, right? So that might be pushing you above the 10 million hit limit if you're using GA standard, for example, something that you don't want. Secondly, it's going to put a whole lot more information into your reports, and all that's got to have an effect on various metrics, particularly the larger ones, which may or may not be going in the direction that you want. I'll also say this though. A lot of these sites, particularly for larger organizations, are built and paid for by the marketing team, and yet the designers that do it don't really connect with or talk to a lot of times the analysts, i.e., the people that are doing the measurement across these sites. And I'm not trying to make a value or judgment statement about it. I'm just kind of stating a fact. And the reason why this is an issue is that you get these eye candy sites. I mean, they look great. Okay, they look great. But so much of what reflects the goals, right, the business goals of the site are event-based. And if these aren't fully and properly tracked, then so much of the business value of this site is not being measured. Yeah. I'll give you a small example of that, okay? Recently looking at a site and, quite clearly developing a connection with the visitor is super important. It's part of the customer journey. You want to really get them to start that relationship with the brand. And so if I wanted to, I could click on a button which would enable me to either create an account or to become part of a mailing list or a number of other things. Each time you clicked on any of those buttons, it popped up an overlay, all event-based, nothing measured.
Yeah.
Right? So looks great, and you can just see that the developers and the company that's putting it together is just, wooing and eyeing the client on those cases. But at the end of the day, it makes it virtually impossible for the analyst to understand. And so that really comes down to this whole thing about what is a site developed and designed for? What are the goals of that site? And I'll just maybe start off with this one, Steph.
Yep.
So earlier I said in the last one, I talked about campaign taxonomies. I think it's going to become the mot du jour. Here's another one for you, okay? Measurement framework.
Yeah.
All right. So when the web first started up and analytics first started up, people always talked about, you need to get your KPIs, your key performance indicators, and there's all this focus on KPIs, and you can go to any conference and people talk about KPIs. I almost think that the focus on KPIs is important, but it's missing the larger issue, and the larger issue is a measurement framework. And what do we mean by that? We mean that there's a customer journey and there are customer segments. And each segment is going to do things along that customer journey which are different. You can have specific goals and business objectives identified for each segment at each step in the customer journey. And those goals are the ones that need to have the KPIs. So really it's not so much about the KPIs themselves because, frankly, anything can be a KPI on the site, right? So it's really about understanding what the measurement framework is, because that contextualizes audiences by stage of customer journey, by specific value-based business objectives.
Yeah.
And so your code and all the measurement has to ladder up to the measurement framework, not vice versa.
Absolutely. Yep. I think that's the number 10. Essentially, if you start with that, you will probably avoid most of the other issues that we mentioned today. Right?
Yeah,
it's really the starting point.
Yeah.
Which I think we covered a lot of the technical aspect. We covered a few more business-oriented or governance aspect, and I think we can wrap this up with a little mention of the WASP tool. When I created the tool back in 2006, so that's a very long time in terms of analytics, I was doing a lot of implementation and wasting too much time trying to see if the tags were firing and the data was being collected. So I created that tool back in 2006, and today it's very different. Today, it's much more powerful. We have two different tools, in fact. One is the inspector, which gives you in-context information while you browse. It gives you the details about the tags that are firing, and obviously not only Google Analytics, but any tags on the page. And then we have, and then we have the WASP crawler, which is a very efficient and affordable way to crawl your site and see all the tags that are firing, and make sure that not only the tag is firing, but it's also sending the right information and for any tag.
Steph, it's at the risk of embarrassing a little bit. I think what you've done with WASP, it's really, it's fantastic, and the evolution of the tool has gotten really good. And I just want to say this is that if data quality matters to you, then auditing the tags on the site is critical because it's like the lowest of the low-hanging fruit that you can address, and so having a robust tool that enables you to quickly surface those pages which are problematic, i.e., wrong, outdated code, no code, things that are odd with it, wrong location, all that kind of stuff. That's really an important thing to have.
And there's no reason not to do it because the inspector is free, and the crawler, you can crawl up to 100 pages on any website as often as you want at no cost. And if you want to crawl more, then the cost is very affordable to do it. So data quality.
Yeah, data quality. And if anybody's interested in learning more about data quality issues, there's a ton of options out there. I would really recommend that you go and find training. There's a lot of training of resources out there. Again, full disclosure, Carnal does a lot of this. It's now become pretty complex out there, so we've kind of done what we think are the top 10 low-hanging fruit, easy for you to kind of go after, although measurement framework is a little bit more complicated, admittedly. But these are the things you should shoot for, and there's a ton of options for you in order to get skilled up and really master the stuff.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is at the end of the day, improving data quality, you need to have a very good knowledge of whichever tool you're using for the tracking, right? But you also need to have a very good knowledge of how the website is constructed, what is the content architecture, what are the functionalities, and then you also need to understand what are the business objectives and all those things. So at the, doing a real audit, I would compare it to finance. Of course, you can maintain your books and everything, but once in a while, you will actually hire someone to do a real professional audit because they just have the experience, and I've seen so many other cases that they can quickly, bring the value out of that audit and give you the confidence that you have the right data to take your decisions. So I think it's really critical.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Even every company at some point in time wants to just have a third party just come and validate, make sure that things are the way they should be, and so auditing is particularly on the larger sites is a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
I think that just about wraps it up, right?
Yeah, we can turn it to Michelle for some questions, and Michelle, up to you.
Okay, we do have actually quite a few questions. The first one, Stefan, is for you. It's actually just a request to repeat where the GA tag should go in the page code.
Okay, so the Google Tag Manager container should go right after the opening body tag. If you implement Universal Analytics directly on the page, which people are still doing it, but if you are going to touch the page, why not do it with Google Tag Manager instead? But if you still want to do it with Universal Analytics, then the code should go in the head of the page.
Okay. Next question is, I added Google Tag Manager code on my site and noticed that my bounce rate dropped significantly and my page views doubled. I've since removed the Tag Manager code. Could this be an issue, or rather, could this issue be a result of installing Tag Manager code in the wrong place?
Well, of course, there can be many different scenarios, but one that I would think of is if that if Google Tag Manager was installed and tracking was enabled, while the old code was still there and sending to the same web property, then of course you have the risk of double firing your tags, like your page views, and instantly it's going to increase your traffic and it's going to reduce your bounce rate, which is really not what you want to do. But there is really the issue is certainly not on the side of the tool. The issue is on the side of the implementation. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, all I would say to that is, first thing is great. So you notice something is out of whack, and next thing is you go back to the code placement and maybe even the code itself, because that's likely where the issues lie.
Mm-hmm. And with Google Tag Manager, you can always make it deploy it in a way that you can send test data to your test web property instead of sending it to your production environment. So at least you send it to a different location while you're doing your tests.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Okay. Thank you. So how do you know when you're close to the GA standard 10 million hit limit?
It's going to be the sum of page views, events, transactions, social interaction. There's basically any call that sends data to GA, except the product related information. So typically, page views, events, social interactions, transactions.
Yeah, I mean, you can basically use a rule of thumb, right? So how many different events are there on the page that are driving hits, and just say, okay, my average is 5, and then just multiply that by the number of sessions, right?
And you go in your reports, and you look at a given month, and you can add it up pretty easily. But the truth is, if you're just a little bit over that,
no worries.
Yeah, no real worries. But if you're well above that, Google is going to let you know that you're well above it.
Well, I was going to say, the way they really know is that you get a letter from Google.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, could you please share some tips on how to find a micro-conversion that is directly tied to revenues and can be used as a strong KPI?
Interesting. To me, a micro-conversion that is tied to revenue is not a micro-conversion. It's a real conversion, right? So everything ultimately leads toward your macro conversion, your real goal, which would be revenue. And the micro conversion are any signals that points toward that direction. So if you think back about your audience and your customer journey and you segment that, and one of the first question I ask people is to tell me about their customer journey or their customer life cycle. What is the, from awareness to conversion, what are the steps that they have in mind? And oftentimes they don't have a clue. So we can suggest some, pretty standard approach to that, leading from awareness to consideration to conversion and even advocacy. And then we look at each functional element of the site and think about, okay, if someone is, what purpose does this feature serve on the site? Is it to increase consideration? Is it for awareness? Is it really the conversion? And we can map out all the content and the functionalities of the website into this kind of matrix and then think about which metrics are indicators that we are moving the needle in the right direction.
So maybe I can just answer this in 2 ways. The first one is yes to everything Stefan has said. I'll boil it down. A micro conversion for somebody who is deep into the consideration phase for a particular audience type. I've got to go south because there's been so much freaking snow on the East Coast that so I'm at a different stage, so a very motivated buyer will be very different from the micro conversion from somebody who's at the awareness phase because they're just different things. So that's where the measurement framework comes into play. Yes. I'll also share this with you, is that we've recently done using predictive analytics, looking at behaviors on site that lead to conversion. So, there's one which is you kind of map that stuff out, as Stefan said, and then there's the other kind of like data-driven brute science approach, which is let's sift through everything and start to look at what are the correlative and causative effects that lead to somebody taking let's say a value-based action. And so I don't want to minimize that is actually a lot of work, but that's I think where a lot of the science is leading now.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to wrap up the Q&A here. Didn't have time to get to a lot of the questions. And
one more.
If we didn't get to your question, we will respond to you directly. So Alex and Stefan, thank you so much for your time today. I think you guys had fun.
For sure.
Yeah.
So we've heard a lot about what can go wrong with an analytics deployment. So what's next? Some things to help you on your way. You've heard about WASP, the Web Analytics Tagging Solution. It's free to download. The link is on the screen. You can check out training.cardinalpath.com for all the latest in analytics and digital marketing training. Maybe start out with some online training. There's lots to choose from there. Or you can get an analytics audit. The reason so many organizations are still working on getting good data is because it's not easy, and it does require a certain level of expertise. Analytics audits are one of Cardinal Path's most popular services and gives you both a thorough technical review as well as guidance on the business side to make sure that your implementation is meeting the objectives that actually matter to you. So to learn more about that, get in touch, info@cardinalpath.com, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Ready, Steph?
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.